Oh no, wait.
Hello, everyone. This is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, coming from Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, from the Rogue River, with the Walter Russell Secret of Light discussion group. And we are now discussing Walter Russell, The Secret of Light, Part 2, Omnipotence, Chapter 5, Sex Conditioned Opposites. As you know, last week we talked about sex also and what that meant. So if anyone is tuning into this video and has not watched the previous one, I would recommend watching the previous one to get an idea of Walter Russell's definition of sex and polarity. And this week we are going to talk about the sex conditioned opposites from pages 123 through 131. The format of this group is that we read the book. I put together questions directly out of the book, which I take from Walter Russell's statements and turn them into questions. And then I actually put the page number on where the answer is found so that later on anyone who wants to find out can go to that page and read it for themselves. But our group discusses matters of Walter Russell's, but also of esoteric Christianity, of psychology, of Blavatsky, of occult science, Steiner, many other works, and we bring that all into the discussion of Walter Russell and see how that relates to Walter Russell's theory of the wave. So let's get started. So we always start with, within the Secret of Light book, the last few pages of each chapter refer back to one of his original works in which he was downloaded information from source, and that book's called the Divine Iliad. And so that writing in the Divine Iliad he puts forth in the Secret of Light to reinforce his point of in the Secret of Light. So the Divine Iliad came first, and then the Secret of Light came later to actually explain more of his inspiration from the Divine Iliad. So let's look at this quote from the Divine Iliad by Walter Russell in the last part of chapter 5. Naught is there in my divided universe which is not sex conditioned, sex interchanging, and sex balancing. Thus, these moving pairs seek balance in voidance forever, to repeat the thought patterns of my thinking in the sex balancing voidance of their conditioning. So within this, if you remember last week, we talked about what sex was. It is a condition, not a thing. It is from the polarity that proceedeth from the one, from the magnetic mind. It turns into polarity, which is two poles, each having separate but equal charge. And each of these charges are an opposite flow to each other, and they void each other out. And as they void each other out, they seek balance, but they will never be balanced, nor will they ever be one. And that's where the motion comes from. So within this, he's saying, in my divided universe, which means the divided universe of polarity, of mother, father, and so on, positive, negative, charge, discharge, whatever we want to call it. We're going to talk about some of the names later on. They're seeking this interchange of this balance. But this balance is never going to be made, because once that balance, if it became balanced, it would be zero, and we would go back into the void or into source. So in order to have our 3D realm, our 3D reality, and see motion and see substance and see form, we have to have this constant interplay and dance between positive and negative. And they forever repeat these thought patterns of my thinking. So within Walter Russell's cosmology, we have mind, which is source, and from that proceeds thinking, which is the polarity, the electric wave. So it goes from electromagnetism magnetic, the one single light, the white light of mind, into the polarity of thinking, and then with it through the thinking becomes waves, and through the one becomes many, and that creates form. But it's in this um, balancing and voidance forever that we have our forms that are made and then canceled. Otherwise, when we looked out, we just see one thing. If they didn't void and cancel each other, this is where we get our movement. This is where we get time. This is where we get sequence. Any comments on what I just read?
Well, the way you explain it, it makes a lot of sense. I can get it better.
Yeah, I think that Russell almost had to write The Secret of Light, because just to read the Divine Iliad, it'd be very difficult to pick up on.
Yeah,
And
because
and
those words, yeah, avoidance
the,
and, you know,
and the only reason that I can actually even understand is because I put together this discussion, so I had to bring in a lot of diagrams and other things, to actually. So it does make more sense and even when you look at the diagrams, sometimes I can discern them, other times I can't. So, um, but this is where we're going. And it's nice because the book does repeat itself in concept. It kind of just tackles a little bit at a time. So as you all know, I posted the questions, and here are all the questions that we posted. And the new format is that we actually put the question on the slide, which makes it a little bit easier to see and to relate. So question 1 is, why is the entirety of this balanced universe divided into unbalanced pairs of father-mother, sex-conditioned sex mates? And from page 123, for the purpose of seemingly dividing universal oneness into a universe of many ones. And again, I have underlined the word seemingly because Walter Russell says everything is an illusion. Even though we see this duality, even though we see this matter, it is an illusion. It's a cinematographic projection. And that's why seemingly is underlined. It's not underlined in the book. I just did it for emphasis here.
But can I say?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
The many ones amounts to individuation.
Correct. It creates the individuation of ideas, color, tone, note, right?
Yeah, everything.
And as we've talked about in the past, is that this is where we get the elements, the periodic tables. All these things become from the one mind. They then differentiate into the many. And as you said, anything else you want to say, Brian, on that?
Well, then the individuation is balanced with
Mm-hmm.
wave
And
there. Yeah.
yeah, so within the diagram here, this diagram has different iterations, but in this one, there is but one cosmic substance, which is mind, which we talked about. So we really have to differentiate between mind and thinking again. So within Walter's cosmology, mind is the mind of God. It's the mind. It's like the one substance. It's the one thing that permeates all things. And from that comes the thinking, which then becomes polarity. And so as the one comes out, the universal substance first divides itself into then two, right? And then others, and so on and so forth. And the increasing energy and harder crystallization appears. And as it moves farther out, we have denser and denser matter. So it would start here, as gases, go farther into maybe water or liquid, go farther and farther out into solids, and then out farther and farther into crystalline or rock or whatever. So as the form proceeds out, it actually becomes denser and denser. So as again, we talked about evolution. Can everyone please mute unless they're going to talk? We have some background noise. So again, we have the idea of evolution and dissolution. So within his idea of evolution is concentrated desire of mind to create the idea of many substances of the one. So within this concentrative force, this is what we call the male force. She also calls the positive force, okay? And this is what is concentrating, which is bringing things into matter. As it concentrates, right? As we go farther and farther into matter, we get more and more concentrated. That reaches a certain peak, and then we go into the dissolution, the other side of the wave. And this is the feminine side, or the radiation side. It is the decentrative, as opposed to concentrative. Desire of mind to return that which it has created back into the source in the one mind. So we can often think about this as this wave cycle, and we can think about it as creation. As a baby is born, the human being is probably the most subtle body in physicality as a child, right? Most supple, most, soft. As we age, we become denser and denser, actually becoming more and more almost brittle, right? Within older age and bones and so on and so forth. Our skin becomes drier. We become much more dense. And then as we begin to reach the other side, we turn back into spirit, right? And our body begins to degenerate in the ground or wherever, we put it, and it goes back into nothingness or source. So we come in subtle, we begin to harden and calcify, and then become deceased, and then as our body, now for the body, the death and the decentration isn't at the point of death. That is just the leaving of the soul, right? The body will still go through this dissolution of decay, and that's where the body actually returns back. So we have this cycle of the wave that starts with the mind, goes into electric thinking, becomes many, then concentrates stronger and harder, and then goes back to the other side of the wave. So these are the father-mother sex conditions. Father is seen as positive, mother is seen as negative, but don't think about positive and negative having good or bad connotation. It's just charge and discharge. So the father principle is the positive charge because it's first. The mother principle is the secondary charge, which meets the charge in opposite polarity, but in same force, but in opposite direction. When those two come together, and when they hit the 0 point, we have creation. Any questions or comments on this diagram?
I like the way you described being the same force.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. I don't know, seemed to make more sense,
And as you remember, we looked at the lever a lot last week and in previous weeks, where we had the balanced length of the lever, right? But one was a positive and the positive negative. It wasn't the length of the lever that caused the imbalance. It was the charge, because each side was balanced. So each force was balanced, but the polarities were different. The charge was different.
And then it builds up and then it gets going again.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And one will be stronger, and it will create the imbalance, and then that will change. This is what we call the universal breath, right? Out and in, and in breathing. The breath in is the evolution, the concentrative force, the life force. The breath out is the dissolution or the death force. So this is what's happening. This is the universal breath that's happening within this wave. The evolution and dissolution, or concentration and radiation. So it says, within this matter are but different states of motion of the one substance. There are 7 tones of an octave, and there are 10 octaves of 7 tones each. So this is talking about relating
Why
this
7?
Excuse me?
Why is there 7? Isn't there 4 on each side and a 0 in the middle?
In terms of the octave, there's actually 8. That's why it's called an octave.
Right, that's what
Right.
I mean. Why
But,
7?
but you have 0. All right. So we have the 7 tones of an octave scale.
But there's 8 tones in an octave scale, no?
There's 8 notes, 7 tones, I think. Again, I'm not a musician, but I know that there's 7, but it's called an octave. We need Grant here, who's more into music.
Oh, we need Jeremy, no? Jeremy likes to talk about the music too.
Yeah. So I am not the music man.
Well,
Okay.
there is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti,
That's 8.
do. That's 8.
Well, that's
No,
8.
it's 7.
Do's repeated it.
Yeah,
I think.
exactly.
Ah,
There you go.
but it looks like 9 to me is what I still say.
Again,
I mean, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3,
Yeah.
4.
yes.
Yeah.
New math, I guess.
Yep.
Must be
These
the
7
core.
apparently different subs. So it says, and underneath it says these 7. So,
I know, yeah, that's why I asked.
and maybe they repeat, as we said. And again, that's something that we need to discuss with the people who are into music. So, what names are used to designate one pair of sex mates from another? Again, these are the names, right? This is what we were talking about. So, from page 123, gravity and radiativity, male, female, positive, negative, charge, discharge, centripetal and centrifugal, generative and radiative, integrative and disintegrative, plus and minus, heat and cold, life and death, buyer and seller, producer and consumer, import and export, empty and filling, inward and outward, north and south, heaven and earth, growth and decay, all of them are similarly conditioned by the 2 opposite electrical conditioners. So within these words here that we've just read, is anyone thinking that there are other words that could be used that aren't here?
Well, there's east and west too.
Mm-hmm.
Black and white,
Black and white.
But is
up and down.
anyone thinking about why there isn't like good and evil put in here, or
Ooh.
those type of words?
It's not a physical thing, maybe?
Well, again, oftentimes
Isn't physical.
within cosmologies, even within Steiner, good and evil are not opposites.
Hmm.
Evil is just a lesser form of good, not the opposite of good.
It's a wayward form.
Yeah, and so it's one and the same.
Until
Actually,
gate stuff.
a lot of it has to do with the perspective of it from the viewer's side, and so one man's evil may be another man's good. It's tough to say those kind of things, to where these things, it's not a relative decision on opposites. It's a very concise, that this is, positive, this is negative, this is charge, this is discharge. I'm a seller, you're a buyer. This is heat, this is cold, and so on and so forth. So even though I think heat and cold could have some of the same, but so within this, as we see here, here's a diagram that Walter put forth, where we see this actually kind of being shown here. And the reason I put this in is so we don't really see the centripetal and the centrifugal often in some of his diagrams. We mostly see mother, father, positive, negative, and so on. So within this, we're seeing that as this centripetal comes in, right, it comes down to the 0 point. See, the charge is coming down. And within the centrifugal, we see it going up, right? So this is concentrating, right, to a point, and this is dissipating. So within this, the polarization multiplies life and growth and actually forms a sphere. And as it dissolves, it forms a plane. And this is where Walter talks about the planet Saturn. that as it dissolves, as it dissipates, as the centrifugal, as it approaches that side of the wave, it begins to make these rings because this area begins to expand and the top becomes more flattened. This is the idea. Hello?
Hey,
Hey,
hey, sorry, I've been busy at work and all
That's
that crap.
Hey, we had a question for you about octaves.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of interject on this good and bad thing real quick,
Okay.
because in a lot of cosmology, it's not just good and bad. They call it four-valued logic. So something's not only good or bad, but it's also good and bad, or neither good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, why also it's not in there.
Because because it's not an opposite. Actually, they can work together. You can't have north and south together. So, so on the octave, we were looking back at this slide, and
Yeah.
we have seven different substances, but an octave is 8. Right? Do you have any idea on that?
Well, you have different intervals between each note, and then I know that between each octave, the tone doubles. So like, but as far as like that goes, so it goes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So the 8th note is the next note an octave up.
But an octave up, right? So
yeah.
So a G's an A, but an octave up.
So go G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. G is the 8th note. It's the next. It's the beginning of the next octave.
Yeah. So there's only 7. A, B, C, D, E, F, G is 7, right?
Yep.
And you go back to the 8th, which is the octave. So there are 7 notes.
Another interesting thing about octaves is when you like strike an A on the piano, all the A's on the keyboard will actually vibrate.
In
which
resonance.
is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Resonance.
Because there's the same note with a different.
Well, they have the same harmonic value, just doubled. It's just like a harmonic intervals. So.
The piano has to be in tune, however.
That's true. Good point.
So let's get back to this. So what I also wanted to show here was that Russell believes that planets are spherical in nature, and it's based on his idea of how matter is formed. Now, it doesn't mean that it can't become a plane or can't become flat, but all planets start out as spheres, and within their degenerative state would become flat. But at that point, the planet itself is probably in its last states of existence.
Is that why we're talking about flat Earth?
It could be, but I don't know if, it could have started out as a sphere and gone to a plane, but I would think at this point we would actually have no mass anymore either, because the mass would be so minute compared to this mass of the sphere.
I think he sees it as a sphere because the magnetic gives that effect.
Yes, exactly.
Because I don't think it's a sphere.
I know. But again, I think if you try to say that Russell believes that it's flat, that's a tough stretch. But
Yeah, we don't know that he doesn't think it though. Can't tell us now.
Well, I think, anyway.
Might change his mind.
So how is a two-way universe expressed in all effects of motion? From page 123, all that are being expanded by negative electricity are simultaneously being compressed and charged by positive electricity to a lesser extent. So again, this is relating back to what I originally read about the two charges being equal but opposite, but as they follow the wave, one will increase and one will decrease and then because that will allow the movement through, and then they will get to a 0 point, and then they will reverse and go through the wave. So as we have here, we have, again, the centrifugal, right? And the centripetal and the centrifugal working together here, one coming down, one going out. So gravity generates heat by compressing cold to make invisible light become visible. So within Walter's cosmology, light surrounds us, we just can't see it. It's not like the light, everything is lit up, that there's light surrounding us. But as we have this compression, it makes invisible light become visible. So within space, there is light, right? I mean, if you say the sun's out there and it's shining on the earth, but you say, oh, it's all dark between the sun and the earth, that's space. Well, where's that light? Why is it just light on the earth? Why isn't the whole space lit up the whole way through? As we look out into space, why isn't it all just lit up? And what he's saying is that as gravity generates heat by compressing cold to make invisible light become visible. The ability of gravity to compress is equal to its ability to expand fission, the unwinding. Gravity radiates cold by expanding heat to make visible light become visible. So we have it expanding to make it visible, and we have it contracting to make it visible. So these are the two sides of the wave, so both sides are visible. But one radiates cold, and one generates heat by compressing cold. So this is the diagram of these two. So as we see here, how they are, we have it expanding multiplies to create rings, cold multiplies to expand spheres. So as the cold multiplies to expand, it becomes a sphere. So as mass comes into play, it begins to create spheres. As this concentration happens, we create spheres. As the concentration occurs, it creates rings. Again, that's what we call it, the rings of Saturn, but there's still a planet, there's still a sphere in the center, because it's not something that happens, it's a gradual process. It just doesn't happen overnight. It's not a sphere becomes a ring overnight. It's a
Doesn't it start as a ring though? Like, don't the planets get
Yes,
created as
exactly.
ring?
Exactly. Well, the planets get started as nebula and so on and so forth. Supposedly, this is what Walter Russell's saying. And then those begin to spin and condense and concentrate and form stars and planets, right? The gases. And so the stars are probably like less evolved planets because they're made from gases, supposedly, right? And the planets become more solid, and then they begin to disintegrate, and then they will eventually become nothing and return back to space and form a black hole.
Didn't you also say it gets larger?
What?
That the planets, as they're closer to the sun, they're smaller. As they get further away, they get larger.
Again, I didn't read that, but that's entirely possible. That's not in the study that we're doing right now, and I didn't read that. That might be in the theory of the universe.
Might be in that universe book.
Yeah. Yes.
How does it explain Pluto then?
Well, Pluto, I guess, is not truly a planet by some people. It's
Okay.
an asteroid or an ice rock.
I was just trying to challenge the theory. But
Yeah, but I think Pluto is by some is not considered a planet. And how do you they say there's Vulcan out there and there's Nibiru out there, which we don't even see. So, and again, within our scientific world of planets, I don't know how much of that's real, just as we don't know if it's flat Earth or round Earth, because we haven't experienced it ourselves.
I think you said something though about how big it is in the first place. That doesn't mean they're all going to be bigger further out. If they start really small, then they'll be but it just means they'll get bigger, from what I recall.
Yeah, but isn't Neptune farther away than Jupiter?
Say again?
I mean, Neptune's farther out than Jupiter, isn't it? Is it? Where's
Yeah, I
Neptune?
think so.
Yeah, so it's smaller, right, than Jupiter.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't think that was part of, I think he said that it doesn't mean that they're going to be bigger. It means
Yeah.
that they
Oh, yeah.
or compress more or expand more, depending on what they started with.
Correct. And what phase they're in of their development. And
I'm looking at the title of the diagram.
mhm,
What's the last word after the cosmic clock there?
after the cosmic clock, spring.
Spring?
Yeah. So as you look at this, it's like a spring, right?
Oh, okay, okay,
That's
spring.
that's
Okay,
winding.
sorry.
That's winding and unwinding.
Oh, okay.
Is it just misspelled then?
Probably. I
think so.
couldn't speed this at the
Yeah.
peak.
It
Yeah,
says,
I've never
it
heard
says
of that
string.
word.
Wait, so maybe it is. Maybe it's not spring. It's sering. Sering.
I know that inside there, you
I think
see
it's
that thing in the middle, the harp string at rest. You see
Mhm.
that?
Yeah.
Right below, it says the harp string at rest.
He likes
So,
yeah,
Anyway.
string. The clock. Yeah, that's stringing. That's harp string. Yeah.
yeah, so it maybe has to do with, well, it says number 3 of harp string series.
Well, see, these is like. Has anyone ever heard of the monochord? Which is just a piece of
well, yeah, it's a sering.
sering.
Yeah, look at the bottom where she said number 3 and the
Mhm.
bottom
That's a string.
3
right
apart.
here.
That's string.
Sering series.
Well, that's also, yeah, harp string series. You're right. Harp string, whatever.
It's just to confuse us.
This
Yeah.
is this is string here.
Yeah, yeah,
And the bottom right.
yeah. The top, the last
going.
line and the
Oh, the
string.
harp spring. Harp spring.
Sering.
Harp string again. Anyway,
That's
anyway.
Yeah,
Harp
he's saying
ring.
harp spring and harp string and string.
Yeah,
Yes,
and
harp
string. Yeah.
ring.
Maybe he
It
just
could
has,
be because of translation. Like Walter Russell, was he English or German?
he was American.
Oh,
Yeah.
whatever. Sorry. I just, in case that, was this the translation? Anyway. Anyway.
So
He
within
didn't
this,
have autocorrect.
so does anyone know what
Yes.
go back to the monochord? Does anyone understand the idea of the monochord, which is just really a chord that is stretched between 2 points? And when plucked, it makes a note. But then if you pinch it in the middle, right, this is what we talked about with the octaves and the notes, that we can create a different tone from the pinching of the chord. And so if this is the harp string here, or the monochord, as we break it down within this, I think we're showing that we also get the octaves that come out. So the idea of the monochord, I think, was, I forget who, that was a philosopher that actually talked about that. And actually Goethe brought it into some of his writings also. So within this, we have the expanded by negative electricity are simultaneously being compressed and charged. So all that are being expanded by negative. So again, what is the negative electricity? That's the female side. That is the dissipative side. That is the radiative side. So as it's being radiated by negative energy, it's also being compressed and charged by positive electricity. This is the wave works. It's dual motion. Now within the wave, as we talked about earlier, we can only comprehend one way of motion. Okay, we can only see it in one way, because if we saw both sides, we wouldn't, all motion would stop. So we see it, and that's why we have sequence and time, because we see just the one flow forward. We don't see the wave flowing backwards. So question number 4, how does electricity affect light? Electricity is forever winding light up into hot spheres and sequentially unwinding them before rewinding. So there's a couple of concepts that we have here. We have the generation of mass. So all mass is generated into spheres from planes by preponderances of centripetal force and degenerated back into planes by centrifugal. And that's what we saw in the previous diagram where we had the centrifugal and the centripetal. So form of mass is controlled by the position of its magnetic poles, which define the polar magnetic bases. So we have the poles here, which is what is the concentrative side, and then we have if the polar magnetic bases of the planet are defined by spheres. So he is talking about planets here. So I don't know if he's flat Earth's a planet, but that's what he's saying here. Planet are defined by the sphere is flattened as indicated by A. If the base is extended as at B, the sphere is even more flattened as indicated by B. So what we're seeing here is we have B, we have A, we have A, we have positive here, we have the 0 point. So as the concentrative generative force moves up to the poles, we form the sphere. We have the positive and negative poles, north and south, positive, negative, right? As they move up, they create the sphere. As the disappearance, as the rotation in electric poles occurs, the expansion comes back down again. See here, these arrows coming back down, and see how we are beginning to get this flattening occurring? So as the degenerative process takes place, the sphere now turns into a plane and then will disappear entirely back to source, back to space. So within this, spheres and concentrative forces go to poles. Degenerative processes go to center, or what he would call equator. So within Walter Russell's cosmology or theory or whatever you want to call it, concentrative go to poles, forming spheres. Degenerative go to equator, going to zero or rings. And from that, he actually created what we call the Russell Coil, which is what Tesla also looked at, which is where he looked at how this concept could be used to make a coil. So the concept behind the Russell Coil, the inner coils are round from the ends toward the center in opposite directions. The outer coils are round from the center towards ends in opposite direction. So when you look at some of Walter Russell's electrical generators, he also put a void in the center of his generator, which is very unique in the design of generators. But he actually took these concepts and put them into practice for creating electricity through generators. So any questions or discussion on generation of mass and degeneration of mass?
I'm curious if there's a possibility that this presentation relates at all to geomagnetic polar reversals that the geologists think they've documented.
It could, in the sense that as we have the reversals, that may be a beginning stage of this degeneration of mass.
Except they have it happening suddenly.
Well, again, that the poles may flip suddenly, the degeneration would take time.
Okay.
Seems to be a cycle, though, when that happens.
What's that?
There seems to be a cycle,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
this pole flip stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if Walter,
2046, October.
what? I missed that.
2046 in October. October of 2046 is the next one.
The next pole shift?
Oh,
That's what they say, and some guys.
I see.
One group.
Okay, so is everyone pretty clear on the whole degenerative concentrative going to poles, degenerative going to equators, forming rings. Concentrative going to poles, forming spheres, degenerative going to equator, forming rings. Okay? So what surrounds the spheres? On page 124, cube wave fields of space. So as you can see here in this diagram, which we discussed a little bit last week, and I think Doug talked about when you look inside the cube that the University of Science and Philosophy made, you can see this with the mirrors. But as this sphere is formed, we have around it this wave fields of space, a cube. And this is actually given in, the diagram I gave a long time ago where we looked at all this, and one of the that I showed for the effect in matter was these spheres in the cubes. So as the degenerative process, as the concentrative force comes into play, right, to form matter that we see, when the magnetic light comes forth, the two sex lights come forth, the magnetic pulse turns into electricity within our vision, within our realm, goes to the red shift, blue shift, turns into the many. That is an electric wave that comes out. So thinking converts to matter due to time and space. We then have this matter formed, which is spheres that are surrounded by cube wave fields. Any questions regarding that statement from page 124?
Because it's a wave field, that's why we can't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we just don't have that power because it says cube wave fields. Well, yeah, I'm sure with the simulation they have now, they're able to show us that, right?
They may be able to. I mean, this is
You know what I mean? Like with semantics or people that know these things.
Yeah, as far as I know, we don't really have any truth like 3D somatics. They're mostly planar with sand or something on them that are forming kind of like 2D images.
Okay.
They have a little bit of, but they don't really form a 3D object. So God's end of the cosmic bridge where motion begins its projection into space to simulate mind idea. So through this magnetic light, leaves become polarized, mother, father, the magnetic pulse, red shift, blue shift, right? Red being male, being father, blue being mother, right? Female. Goes to the polarity first, and then that turns into the many different colors, many different tones, many different gases. And then through that is created physical matter. Any questions or comments? All right. So what is the magnitude of charge of each opposite? From page 124, it charges in excess of its discharge for 1/2 its cycle. It then discharges in excess of its charging. So do you guys remember this diagram from a few weeks ago about the length of the wave and what people think the wave is, the error? Remember, so within this diagram, and I wanted to bring this back because I wanted to make sure that we realize that this is one cycle of a wave. The error is people think that this is one cycle or that this is one cycle. And he's saying no, that it is from here to here, right? So at this point, this is the 0 point where we shift into the disintegrative or concentrative, right? And so at 1/2 of its cycle, it charges in excess of itself for 1/2 its cycle, then it discharges. So as this one discharges, this one charges. Because we have the two waves going forth together on top of each other, equal but opposite. But one is discharging for 1/2 of its cycle in excess of its discharge for 1/2, and the discharge is in excess of its charging. So as we have this constant flow within the wave, we have these forces that are working with charge and discharge. So does anyone have any feelings about how this all works and why it works and why it's electric? And does it amaze anybody that this is an electric universe?
What do you mean amazed? It's that we're electric?
Yeah, that this is all kind of worked out, that this, from what Walter Russell's saying, it's so, that matter is so mechanical in a sense. You know, electric. I mean, there is quite a constant of electrical current that forms the matter.
Seems logical to me.
Okay.
But it seems very fluid, fluid and changing, you know, and by saying this thing where it says excess in both ways there, then you know it, there's constant, I guess there's constant growth, you know what I mean? Like,
and that's the number one rule that we learned of the natural laws, right? Is evolution.
evolution, yes, sorry.
That things are constantly changing, right?
We
Evolving.
got to ask Snopes.
Excuse me?
We have to ask Snopes.
Yeah.
Have him fact check it.
But it's constantly changing. And so but we have this charge and discharge that is constantly occurring through the 0 point of equilibrium.
I see in there in the diagram, the universal reproductive octave. You see that? Reproductive. It's kind of neat, eh?
Well, that's what this is all about, right? I mean, what do you have when you have two sex pairs? I mean, the reason for that is for reproduction, right? Exactly, right? I mean, this is the idea, and that through the reproductive energy, through that cycle, is how all things are created. And that's the whole idea of the two sex pairs, that without the two sex pairs, nothing is created. Nothing's created without the two sex opposing pairs seeking balance.
It talks about time down there too.
See, all energy expressed.
It's not what they teach in school, so it gives
Yes.
it a couple points right there.
So letter C, right, indicates the point of energy impact. Letter BB indicates points of maximum opposition. So at BB is the point of maximum opposition, which is the apex, right? And then on the contrary, all waves are those portions indicated. Okay, so where's the thing about B? So as we go through this, the universal reproductive octave, any questions on the length of the wave or its charge is in excess of its discharge for 1/2 its cycle? Again, this is a cycle of a wave, 1/2 its cycle. So it's going through here and then it reverses out.
Well, it's like the battery example that was used early on, like, you know, in previous, like if it didn't discharge and charge or sorry, follow this, then the battery would be flat. I just think that we similarly have to be also charging at night, if you like. while we're at rest, or while
Mhm.
we're well, while it's dark and the sun is on, when the earth is on the other side, or stuff like that. So it's very well, it's balanced in the way it's doing it. For sure.
Any more comments on the magnitude of the charge for each opposite? All right, let's go on to the next. So I put these two questions together. This is 7 and 8 together because they're very similar. So what does the father principle multiply? Again, the father principle is the positive. It's the first light that comes forth from the mind. And it, from page 125, it multiplies light into density and high potential. So it's the concentrative force. So it's bringing matter into solidity, high potential. What does the mother principle divide? So we have the father principle multiplying and the mother principle dividing. So the mother principle divides light into vapors and gases of lower potential. Light is thus multiplied and divided into suns and planets surrounded by space. So any comments on that light is thus multiplied and divided into suns and planets surrounded by space, and why that would be? Well, as we know, right, we're saying that matter comes in through the father principle and concentrates into spheres, which Walter Russell also calls planets, correct? As time goes on, it concentrates on the poles, then it begins to degenerate to the center, to the equators. As it begins to degenerate, it goes from solid to gases, right? As we see here, high potential, light to densities of high potential. But then it decentrates into vapors and gases. Okay, so the light is thus multiplied, so it goes into planets, into suns, into gases, and then eventually dissipates altogether and goes back into space, into nothing, or into, back to source, to be recreated, right? To be reformed from space to make new planets, to make new concentration as mind sets forth and begins to concentrate again. So as we look at this, figure here, we have the first octave, second octave, third. So, we have the different densities of gases, moving down the spectrum into the elements and so on, getting denser and denser as we go. Silver, cadmium, tin, iodine, so on and so forth over here. And then we have the red being the male, the blue being the female portions, going through the octave, even up to the 9th octave, which I don't know how you have a 9th octave, but we got a 9th octave, which is probably the repeat of the 1st octave, as we talked about earlier, right? The 8th octave, 9th octave. We have isotopes here. So within this, as the wave follows through, right, it starts out as gaseous, going into solids, and then dissipating back out into space or nothingness. So any questions or comments on those statements?
There's so much to know on this, like the inert gas, and Dr. Lando mentioned it at that talk today.
Yes.
Where he talked about spagyrics. He described, anyway, he also talked about distilled water, but he talks about this, and how it all functions in our body,
Mhm.
and how to release energy and put it back in, and you know that when you take it, well, it helps your body stay healthy, because it all has a function kind of thing.
Well,
So
yeah, because you're
brings
actually,
it down to that level, obviously, of health. But
yeah, and and when you start putting in, I mean, the inert gases are the original building block, right? Just like the cell salts.
yeah, you talked about the cell salts a little bit too.
So
Mhm.
as you start out with the inert gases in the body, you now have prima materia to build from in the body, right? And so this is the beginning building blocks, to whereas you would put these heavier metals in the body, heavy metals, you would have to dispel from the body. And so
Mhm.
we're putting in these, as you get into these, the potassium, the calciums, these are some of the next levels, right, of where we actually begin to make bone and cartilage,
Mhm.
so on and so forth.
Mhm. Mhm.
So as we get into these heavier metals here, arsenic, bromide, and these are actually, we need pieces of these, very little bit of these.
Yeah, trace
We're
elements.
trace elements, but we need larger amounts of these, oxygen, nitrogen, so on, right? Carbon, to actually make the body, but we just need trace elements of these because they're denser and denser.
I notice he has these squares like around krypton, argon, neon.
Mhm.
Do you know anything about these? Like these are,
No, there is, the main drawing is a Russell drawing,
yes.
but then these other reds and blues and notes are
Okay.
put on by somebody else to actually make it a little bit more descriptive,
Okay.
and to actually show these gases and the color. That's why I brought it in. Plus, the color helps it. I mean, it just makes it more interesting to look at. Um, but
Okay.
I think a lot of it is I also wanted to show where he was saying that we had this change in the wave here, where we went to these
Mhm.
reds, right, and the blues. So
Mhm.
this is showing the charge discharge also from male to female, father, mother, and so on, positive, negative.
It's such a bigger view of male and female, eh?
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's everywhere. I'm just
Mhm.
saying, even in what I studied for about consciousness, it's all about the father plane and the mother plane, and there's like um, as above to below, and all
Mhm.
those things. Like there's an order to this thing,
Mhm.
and it so that it's always the mother father, like father mother, sorry, father mother father.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a way to access this, and yeah, now he's showing it from this
Mhm.
perspective, but
And within Walter Russell's cosmology, right, he says that the secret of creation is in the wave, right? In the wave lies the secret of creation. So as we begin to understand this wave, just as you were saying with Dr. Lando, and ways to heal and ways to provide energy into the body, by understanding this, which Dr. Lando does very well,
yeah.
we can begin to see how to heal and how to actually, provide benefit to us through analyzing the wave and putting these principles into our health and into our world, into all kinds of other things also, into our planet. So any more questions on the lights and the vapors and the higher potential and lower potential? Okay, let's go on to question 9. So question 9, what is the difference between the matter of heaven and earth? From page 125, volume. And volume was actually capitalized in the book. And therein lies the secret of the universal pulse beat. Space is a division of solidity into tenuity. And I put down the definition of tenuity if no one knew what that was, because I didn't for sure. It is the lack of substance or strength. lack of thickness, lack of density.
So therefore space.
Therefore space. So heaven is not a three-dimensional. From what Walter's saying here, it is probably not composed of matter. It's
So when he capitalizes volume, he's not talking about sound, or is he?
no, he's
It's a way,
talking about the volume of,
the amount of substance.
yes, like a glass would hold volume. So it would hold matter, would hold three-dimensional matter.
Like a cubic foot versus a square foot.
Excuse me?
Like a cubic foot or a cubic anything.
Yeah, but it actually is a three-dimensional, right? When you have three
That's what I meant.
dimensions,
Like, the cubic
Yeah.
yard, it's like
exactly,
a square.
exactly, exactly. So what he's saying here is that there is no pearly gate that's a physical thing when you go to heaven, right? It's not a physical, that heaven doesn't have volume. It's only in this realm that we actually have volume, right? Within the physical plane. So within the etheric planes, within the astral planes, within the divine planes, there is no volume. That
So
there
it's
is,
the formless world, the arupa,
Mhm.
like,
correct.
and then we have, well, what we have, like we're
Mhm.
at we're at the bottom of the
Mhm.
bottom of the plains, okay? Well,
Or the beginning.
well, well, we are trying to go home. So,
Yeah, lowest level of heaven, highest level of hell.
well,
Yes, we are in the transition. So
yeah, right now, yes.
the diagram of gravitational flow. So here we have tenuity, right? So we have gravity bringing everything into form, right? Concentrating, high potential, solid, volume, mass. And then as radiation and begins to work on that mass and it begins to disintegrate, it becomes less and less dense, becomes less and less voluminous, and eventually goes into tenuity, right? Back into space.
What Enoch talks about that there's no, that's like not 3D also.
That
No.
what? That heaven's
No.
not 3D or the world's not 3D?
Yeah, that heaven.
Yeah.
Gates, it talks about the gates on each corner.
Mhm.
Somebody talks about it.
Mhm.
I think he asks the angel he's with.
So this is, again, we get back into the fall into matter, right? That we talked about, I think, last week or a couple of weeks ago. We're falling into volume. We're falling into density. It's not a fall of like sin or consciousness, really. It's a fall that we're going denser and denser into solidity from this tenuity. So at one time we were pure tenuity, right? We were pure, we lacked density. And then we begin to fall into matter and become denser and denser as we fell. The idea of falling to earth because of gravitational or whatever. So this is the idea that our bodies became denser and denser and denser and denser as we fall into solidity. And again, this is kind of the concepts that we've shared before about Luciferic and Ahrimanic. The Ahrimanic forces want us to become denser and denser and denser. Steiner conveyed that when he actually was, focusing on a sculpture of Ahriman, that he felt like he was just encased in concrete because that force was so solid and just so dense. And Lucifer is much more the bringer of light. You know, he's the kind of guy that's saying, let's go to Teneity, right? Let's go out here to spiritual realms, and let's just go play out here and don't be concerned with this world. So these are the two tensions that pull on us. And what some say is that's what the Christ centering force is to hold these two tensions in the Christ consciousness as we hold tenaity and solidity. Any questions on what we do? Let's read a little bit about this too. So within the diagram, we have the tenaity as the forces want to pull out to tenaity. They want to pull in. So he's calling it gravity, right? This is called radiation. I think it's called radiation. So radiation wants to radiate out. Gravity wants to condense in, form matter, form space. Out here is formlessness, right? This is what we talked about. Remember, we talked about what heaven was formless. Remember that? So the simulation of the still white magnetic light occurs at the spherical center of the wave field system. The wave axis, the cube wave boundary, and the inner reflecting radar planes are the, I don't know what this is, dividing, connecting lines of relationship that represent the still white magnetic light in the relative universe. The one undivided light of the mind at rest is the still magnetic white light, which is everywhere at once in the whole universe and which cannot be sensed anywhere in the relative sensed universe. So what we're saying is that this white light of mind encompasses all things. We can't see it. It's not like everything's lit up. Even in the darkness, the white light is there. It's just that we can't sense it. So this is the omniscience, the omnipresence of God, right? Is this white light all about us at all times. This is the mind, the one mind that's around us, the still magnetic light. But through that light, which I guess we could call ether, we could call the mind of God, we could call it many things. Through that, matter is formed. But it may need a human and actually to see the matter to form the matter. Without the human, without the earth, without the physical, it probably would need a being, because they say the earth's a being, so maybe the earth can actually create form also, a sentient being, a sentient physical being. Any questions on what we just talked about with tenaity, formlessness, gravitation, and its relationship?
What you just described there, is that plasma?
Plasma in I think it's more ether. I mean, there's forms.
Ether? I'm just wondering.
Because I think plasma is a form of matter.
Okay.
Ether is not really a form of matter.
Mhm.
It's the white light. So I think there's solid, gas, liquid, and gas, solid, liquid, gas, and then plasma is a form of matter.
Now,
And so,
the universe guys do call it the plasma universe, the electric universe guys.
well, again, the plasma is it's a form of matter. So the white light would be formless and would not be material.
Yeah, I think they call the electric universe.
Yeah,
is-
once it becomes electric, once the mind becomes electric, it does become matter.
No, it's
when
not.
it's-
I mean, it's matter though. The guys I'm thinking of, they don't. It's matter. They just say it's plasma. That everything is plasma.
But what I'm trying to say is, if they call it the magnetic universe,
Electric.
but I'm saying if they called it the magnetic universe, it would be mind, right? The still magnetic light, right? That's what we're talking about right here. The still magnetic light, the white magnetic light. Once it becomes electric, it can become into matter. correct? That's what we've been saying.
Is plasma matter?
It's a form, they say it's a fourth form of matter. Yes. When you look at forms of matter, plasma is considered a form of matter because it has substance, right?
Look at his
Plasma,
book.
right? So again, then these are just terms and semantics of terms, right? But the idea that Russell has is that once we have an electric universe, it's material.
They follow. I have to just see what they're talking about because they do.
Yeah, but when it's
Yes, they do.
magnetic, it's just mind and it's formless. So if we have a universe, if we have these things, it would be electric, it'd be have positive, negative, father, mother, and be a solid, right, of the universe. Once it turns magnetic, these things that we're talking about in between, which is the nothingness, which is the non-material, then that's the magnetic mind. It's tenuity, lacking density.
When I first read your question, the difference between quote unquote matter of heaven and earth, and the answer starting off with volume, I immediately thought, like my 7th grade high school teacher would explain things in terms of atoms. In heaven, there's none. There's no matter, essentially.
Correct. It's spiritual substance, which does not have any solidity.
Yep.
Which is not 3D, right?
Right.
So therefore, when Jesus says, "Why do you seek heaven? It is here." It could be here. We just don't see it because there's no solidity to it, right? There's no matter to it. We don't see it. It could be all around us. It's not some place we go to, like I said, to the pearly gates, and there's St. Peter sitting in front letting us in as a physical being, right? This angel's not really a physical being.
It does matter, but there's just no matter.
It does matter, yes, exactly. And so it makes you think a bit about, so when we do see incarnations of beings, right? If we do see a seraphim or Gabriel, or is that really, because we know that Christ, when he came back, I couldn't say we know, but the Bible states that when Christ came back, he was actual physical. So he may, and this is what they say about like the Christ type figure or ascended masters, is that they do have the ability to manipulate matter, right? They can go from a spiritual being into matter at will. And that is really what we are calling the ascension. When we can resurrect back from into tenuity and back into solidity. We can ascend into pure energy and then back into solidity.
That's
Some guys have a different opinion.
That would be future travel, eh? Imagine.
Yeah.
We won't need those planes. Aeroplanes.
Yeah, we go into a gate.
Yeah, we just go through portals.
I've always wanted to visit Egypt.
Like in Paris, they're all over France. Turn them off. What did they build all those giant things for? Just to pass through? Like, it's ridiculous if you look at some of that stuff.
You mean the monuments? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, like an Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah.
For example. They built that because it looks nice.
Well, and that's really what, and again, that's where we get into, do we really need the things we see, or is there a different way to travel to, like, as you say, and what were their pyramids, and were they portals, and were they, and so on and so forth, right? That's a whole different story, but the idea is that is there energy that we can go to tenuity, right? Because to do that type, we'd have to actually go from solidity into a tenuity, back into solidity, for some type of astral travel through a portal.
Yeah. Well, they call plasma here a fourth stage of matter.
Correct. That's what I was saying.
I guess you've heard this, right?
That's what I just said. I said it was the fourth stage of matter.
Fourth state of matter, right?
Yeah.
So that means what you're saying, if it's matter, then it has to be electric.
That's what Russell's saying, yes. Correct. And that's why if they say it's electric universe, they're talking about a material universe. They're talking about a 3D universe. It is not a spiritual plane.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
It's definitely,
if we're talking
Understand.
about the electric universe, we're talking about a physical universe. If we're talking about a magnetic universe, we're talking about tenuity, we're talking about mind, we're talking about a non-physical realm. And just as Jesus said in the Bible, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. Right? It's not of this world of the 3D.
Right.
It's of a different existence, of a different plane.
I'll understand.
Any more questions or talk about tenuity and solidity? Okay. Next question, number 10. What can never unite to become one? The mother light unfolds from the father light. The father light refolds. Each has been born from the other. Each is the other, but they could never unite to become one. This is unrequited love. They can never unite. They can never unite. Because once they unite, they become zero formed and they become formless. So as we have the father-mother principle, right, the two lights, the two, when we get back to those definitions, when we see father-mother, we see positive, negative, charge, discharge. We see these same terms. So within this father-mother, we have the equator here, right? We have the poles. As we go to the poles, this is what the father light wants to do. It wants to concentrate on the poles. The mother light wants to degenerate, disintegrate, radiate to the equators. Dissipate. Mother, father. Positive, see, now in this one they're showing positive, positive for father and mother. Again, he talks, when he does the opposite, he doesn't say positive, positive, he says positive, negative. So, but we're showing that there's charge on both sides. With the equator in the middle. We have axis of gravity. And we have the whole idea that one unfolds into the other, just as in the wave, right? And so I brought this diagram back just to kind of review a bit. Is that, see, there is no such effects in nature as negative charge or negative charge particles. Electricity is nature's sex force, so we have male, female. So we're showing the positive charge. And then through this, in a man's magnet, you have positive, negative. But in God's magnet, we have the both, which then form the sphere and into a curved planes of equipotential electric pressures. So as we have this folding, unfolding, changing, we never have it becoming one. It is always going to remain separate within the physical universe. So this is illustrating the father-mother principle of building bodies by dividing light into polarized units and reproducing bodies by uniting two opposite projected units into one by centripetal compression. Polarity and sex are one. Sex and electric potential are one. Mother-father principle, the centripetal and centrifugal, so on and so forth. So any questions on that each is the other, but they can never unite to become one?
Yeah. So, but they each came originally from the one.
Well, and the way that Russell talks is that the Father comes first. Once it comes into existence, then the negative principle, and this is where it kind of is confusing because he's saying, over in some of the other diagrams that it's positive, positive, but in what we just read, the Father principle comes out first as positive. Once it becomes electric, once it becomes dipolic, the mother principle kicks in, which is the negative, and they are opposite but equal, right? They are unfolded into each other, but they are always in constant motion, right? They cannot become one. They are never at rest, right? And they're always in opposite directions. Because if they're in the same direction, it's not going to work, right? We no longer have creation. They have to be in opposite directions of equal but opposite force. And so therefore they can never become one because they're always opposite, right?
Hence we have the wave or constant.
First we have the wave and constant and evolution, right?
Yeah.
And also like like our Earth keeps the distance from the sun or the moon or the planet, like the whole thing is moving, but it's staying within, like
the laws of nature.
So it works, kind of neat, eh?
Well, it's amazing when you see the oneness and you see, that not just our planet, but the other spheres in the universe. If that's what is real, that it's not just portals out there and flat planes, but if there are spheres and there are orbits and there are suns and there are moons and there are millions of them, billions of them, it's very amazing.
Yeah, nonsense.
How it all works together. So, any more questions on this as being that the other one is the other, but they can never unite to become one? All right. Question 11. This is the last and final question. What are the 2 points of rest fundamental to every circle? And the page 127, the point of beginning at the wave axis and the point of interchange between positive and negative opposite at the wave amplitude. So we're talking about these 2 rest fundamentals in every circle. And this is really, I put up this law here just to show kind of how we talked about these things earlier about induction and conduction going to a 0 and the intense pressure of high potential at the ends and the release pressure of low potential. So again, this would be considered the equator, right? This would be considered the poles. As we go into the center of the female or into the disintegration, or this is where we get this is where we get the plane, right? The ring. This is where we get the sphere. So induction attracts induction, negative, positive. Conduction repels both conduction and induction. So when we look at this diagram here, we see one that's going, spiraling out to maximum pressure. Union of both, regeneration, and so at this point it's 0 minimum pressure. Degeneration is a dotted line. Generation is this black line. Degeneration is the dotted line. So we have one going in this direction and the other going in the other direction. So generating mass seeks higher pressure zones. Degenerative mass seeks lower pressure zones. So we get back to the idea of concentration at the poles, degeneration at the 0 point or equator. So as we finish this up, any questions on this sex conditioned opposites or why this why this chapter was titled Sex Conditioned Opposites. That's what we've talked about this whole chapter, is how these sex conditioned opposites unfold into each other, but are juxtaposed and will always be juxtaposed in order to create matter. Any comments or questions on what we discussed today?
Where do you get these diagrams? My book does not have them.
No, and that's part of the challenge of putting together this discussion. Is I have to go out on the internet and pull a lot of these, because they're not together. I mean, this is one of the problems with The Secret of Light, I think, is that there are some diagrams, but they're in the last chapter, and they're not that explanatory, the ones that are even in the book. So some of these are pulled from like atomic suicide, some are pulled from the home study, some are pulled from some of his other books, you know,
Okay.
and some are pulled from, I think, lectures he gave that really weren't published in books. Or they could be diagrams from other people that have been put together to explain concepts. But they really help when talking about these concepts, because without them, like I said, when I read the first part of the Divine Iliad that we start off with, there's no way I could have explained any of that had I not put all this together before reading that.
And he claims that the Divine Iliad he wrote it once, with never editing or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
that was his visiting with an angel or something, right?
yes, and again, this gets back into the knowing and gets back into cosmologies and what is brought forth, right? And these are things that we would say are brought forth from the ether or brought forth from the tenaity, right? There's a spiritual realm which information exists and resides, and that is brought to man from tenaity, from mind, from source, and brought into the physical to manifest. And so that's an example of how concepts of mind can become manifest in the physical from the spiritual. And this is what Walter Russell actually really wants, mankind to understand, is that there is a knowing, there is a source, and through that source, through that knowing, we can learn all things. But we have to seek that source. He believes that all people want to seek that all men, again, when we've talked about it, I question if all men really want to know. Some I don't think do. I think some are happy not to know. Ignorance is bliss.
Brainwashing.
For some, right? But there are some who do want to know, and who do, and that's really the path of the mystic. But now that we have mystic, and when, like with Steiner, he does spiritual science, because we are given both a brain and a logic, and we're also giving a heart, and we're giving feeling and spirituality. And to combine those two things is really where Russell differentiates himself from just a mystic, but as a spiritual scientist. So with that, I am going to stop recording, and then we can wrap up between ourselves.